Good morning, students. Let's start learning theories. This is a continuation of actual child psychology. Some theories in child psychology actually they are grouped into learning theories because they are based on the learning process, not only for children but also for adults. These theories can answer few questions. They can explain you how we learn things in our day-to-day life. Two terms that you need to know before going into the learning theories or the behavior aspect and the construction part of it. So behaviorism is something how you respond to an external stimulus. So the way you respond to an external stimulus is nothing but behavioralism, whereas constructivism is something different, how you make a meaning of the experience for ourselves. So we have faced such certain situation and we have responded in one way. But the constructivism part is how we make a meaning of that experience. So there is a mild difference between behavioralism and constructivism that you need to understand. So the first theory among the learning theories, so is the classical conditioning theory. This is very important. This is an important 4 marks question for you, and sometimes, sometimes most of the times asked in Viva. So you need to understand this theory. It's very easy and interesting theory. It is also called as learning by association. Why it is called as learning by association? You will, after knowing the basic part of the theory, you can understand. So it has been proposed by Ivan Pavlov in 1903. He was a Russian physiologist. So you need to know that he was dealing with the physiology part and accidentally he came through this theory. So initially he was studying digestion. So he was studying on digestion as he was a physiologist and accidentally he observed few things based on which he has proposed this theory. So this theory has been proposed by Ivan Pavlov in 1903. So now the theory that we are learning is classical conditioning theory, which is also called as learning by association, which has been proposed by Ivan Pavlov in the year 1903, and he was a Russian physiologist. So this was the experimental setup of Pavlov, which included actually a dog, as he was studying on the digestion aspect of a dog. The other names for this theory that you need to remember, because the synonyms part you might be getting a synonym as a 4 marks question, and even though you know the theory, sometimes you might not be in a condition to know that respondent conditioning means the same classical conditioning. So the synonyms for anything you need to remember them nicely. So other names for this theory are Pavlovian or the respondent conditioning. Learning by association, already it has been told in the previous slide. So other names for classical conditioning theory are Pavlovian conditioning or respondent conditioning or learning by association. Anything is one and the same. So classical conditioning, learning by association, Pavlovian conditioning, respondent conditioning, everything is one and the same. So before going into the theory aspect, you need to know few terms. If you understand those terms, the theory is very easy for you. So unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned stimulus. So unconditioned stimulus is something, a stimulus that elicits a response without any training. So a stimulus which can elicit a response without any training is called as unconditioned stimulus. So it is an unconditional stimulus when it can elicit a response without any training. An unconditioned response is something, an innate response elicited by an unconditioned stimulus, usually either a reflex or an emotional response. So here the important terms that you need to remember are that it can be either a reflex or an emotional response. Best thing that you can quote is whenever you feel sad or you feel uh, you get tears, because this is a reflex. No one has to learn that aspect, because it is an emotional response to a particular situation. So if we feel sad, the emotion response in a reflex way or unconditioned way will be getting tears. So this is the best example for unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response, where you don't need any training and it will be innate for our body. Okay, it can be either a reflex or an emotional response. Then conditioned stimulus. So this conditioned stimulus is a stimulus that elicits a response because it has been repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus. So here conditioned, because you're creating something or conditioning something. This is a stimulus that elicits a response because it has been repeatedly paired with an unconditioned stimulus. So conditioned response is something, a reflex response after learning has occurred to elicit the response by a conditioned stimulus. So the four terms that came here are the unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus and conditioned response. Here the first pair, that is unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response, they don't need any training. They are innate, are inbuilt in our body. They can be either reflex or an emotional response. Whereas conditioned stimulus and conditioned response, they are actually paid to something and because of which the response is coming. So this you need to be very clear. The process of classical conditioning here, it is actually before the conditioning has occurred for a dog, because here the experimentation has been done on a dog. For a dog, if it smells that meat powder, what happens? The dog will get salivation. It is a natural reflex phenomena for a dog. Even for a human being, if we smell or if we see something which is very good food, we see, automatically you start salivating. So salivation is a reflex for our body, and even for a dog, when it sees a meat powder, it gets salivation. So it is an unconditioned stimulus. Here is the meat powder, whereas unconditioned response is the salivation. So this I think you are clear. Then bell. What about bell? So bell has nothing to do with the dog. So even if you ring a bell, the dog don't salivate. So bell here is a neutral stimulus. NS means neutral stimulus. So this box is showing before conditioning any dog. A dog can salivate if it sees or smells a meat powder, whereas bell has nothing to do with the dog and bell is a neutral stimulus. And what happens during conditioning? So the second box here is a continuation of the first box. In the first box, it is actually before conditioning, where meat powder is giving salivation as a response, whereas bell is acting as a neutral stimulus without any salivation. Whereas during conditioning, what is happening? Whenever you feed a dog, whenever you are giving it a meat powder, if you are accompanying that meat powder along with a sound, that is a bell, sound of a bell, what happens after repeated association? This bell, which was a neutral stimulus before, it gets conditioned. So now the bell, which was a neutral stimulus, now it became a conditioned stimulus because it was paired repeatedly with the meat powder, which is an unconditioned stimulus leading to the response of salivation. So the bell has been repeatedly associated with the meat powder, leading to conditioning of that stimulus. This I think you are clear now. So these two boxes are showing what happens before conditioning and what happens during conditioning or acquisition of that stimulus and response pair. And this is again a continuation. So before conditioning, during conditioning, second box, and the third box here is showing after completion of the conditioning, what happens? There is a formation of conditioned stimulus and conditioned response pair. That is, bell here became a conditioned stimulus leading to salivation. So whenever the dog hears the sound of a bell, it starts salivating. This was actually accidentally observed by the scientist Ivan Pavlov. While he was experimenting on digestion, he was feeding the dog, and whenever the dog was getting fed, there used to be some sound, sound of a bell. And what happened after few days, the scientists observed that even without giving a meat powder, on hearing that bell sound itself, the dog is starting salivating. So accidentally he came through this observation. So this is the schematic presentation of classical conditioning, wherein the food, which was an unconditioned stimulus leading to an unconditioned response, has been paired with a conditioned stimulus, that is the sound of a bell, and which is eliciting the same response as this unconditioned stimulus. So here the learning is resulting from association of pairing of two stimulus in the environment, and hence the synonym for this theory was learning by association, because here two association or pairing of two stimuli is happening in the environment. Other name has been given as learning by association. The type of learning in which stimulus acquires the capacity to evoke a response that was originally evoked by another response in a simplified way. So the process of classical conditioning. This classical conditioning process itself can be divided into acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extinction, spontaneous recovery. So you might feel it difficult to remember these terms because every theory will be getting some sort of term or the other. But if you understand the theory and if you can understand the meanings of each and every English term, it becomes very easy to remember the things. So here you are coming across few terms. I think if you are good at English, definitely you can remember these things very easily. Acquisition is something you are acquiring something. Acquire means you are getting something. So acquisition is the process of learning or getting. Initial learning process is the acquisition, whereas generalization. So generalization is nothing but if I came across something, if I came across a wrong behavior from one student and if I generalize it to all the students in that batch, it is nothing but generalization, because I feel that everyone in that batch is one and the same, and everyone will behave. I expect that everyone will behave in the same bad way. That is generalization. But discrimination is something if in that batch five students are there and two students are bad and remaining three are good. So as time passes, after 1 week of posting, I started discriminating these three good students and these two bad students. So discrimination is something trying to differentiate the things. Okay. So discrimination can be in a wrong way also. It can be taken because based on color, based on religion, based on caste, if you start discriminating, that is also discrimination. But here you try to understand that discrimination is trying to differentiate the things, differentiating the things. Okay. Extinction is nothing but extinction. So some animals are extinct, means they have disappeared from the world. Extinction is nothing but disappearance. Disappearance is extinction. And spontaneous recovery. So spontaneous recovery is nothing but spontaneously. Spontaneous means if I ask one question and if one student without even thinking about it has answered, it is nothing but spontaneously he has answered. So spontaneous recovery of something. Last thing, it has been recovered again spontaneously. So these are the meanings for these English terms. And in the next part, I will just explain you the process of classical conditioning based on these terminologies. Here I am stopping. Please listen to the next part of the theory in the second part of the video. Hi again, this is the second part of classical conditioning. In the previous part of the video, you have seen that classical conditioning is one type of learning theory, and other names for classical conditioning are Pavlovian conditioning, respondent conditioning, learning by association, because we are pairing two stimulus. Here it is called as learning by association, and it has been proposed by Van Pavlov in 1903, who was a Russian physiologist studying digestion in dogs. Okay, so the classical conditioning process can be explained in a systematic way, and the terms that are used for this process of classical conditioning are nothing but acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. The meaning of the particular terms I have discussed in part 1, but again I am trying to explain the process using the same example, that is a dog example. So acquisition is the first part or the first process involved in this classical conditioning theory. Acquisition is nothing but learning a new thing, acquiring a new thing. Here the new thing is nothing but forming a classic conditioned stimulus response. So conditioned stimulus is getting formed because of pairing or repeated association with a unconditioned stimulus. So acquisition here is nothing but the pairing of a bell sound to the food leading to salivation. This is acquisition. Next, what is generalization? Generalization, in order to understand that there are different kinds of bell sounds. So the dog initially for any bell sound it will start salivating because it can't differentiate the thing, and for any such sound it starts salivating. But if you repeatedly give food only for a particular kind of sound and you don't feed it for the other kinds of sounds, then after few days or after few associations, what happens? The dog starts discriminating the thing. That is, it discriminates the type of sound for which you are feeding it. So it then starts discriminating the things. So for which bell I will get food and for which bell I won't get the food. Then what happens? After a few days, you stop feeding it for any kind of sound. So you even on you give that bell sound, but you don't feed it. After repeatedly doing the same thing, the dog will be in the process of extinction. That is the pair which has formed. That is the pair of the ringing of a bell and food. Now it is extinct and the dog will not salivate even if you ring a bell. That is extinction. And what is spontaneous recovery? After few days, anytime, sometimes the dog might salivate on hearing a bell sound. So that is, it has spontaneously recovered what it has acquired in the past. So that is nothing but spontaneously it has recovered the same pairing. Spontaneously it has recovered after many days because it has acquired something in the past. It has learned that paid association, what it has learned, it it has come in a spontaneous way. So I think you can understand the things, the acquisition of something, generalizing something, starting discriminating something, and extinction of something, and spontaneous recovery. So here these terms are very important, and if you understand the things, there is nothing difficult and nothing you need to you did not struggle to remember these things. Then what are the examples of classical conditioning in our day-to-day life? There are many, there might be many examples, but pertaining to pediatric dentistry, the best examples that you can quote is the fear aspect or the pain that the children associate with. So yeah, main problem is that medical settings and dental settings, there are many similarities between medical settings and dental settings, and a child will be in their initial stages of life. Mostly they will be routinely going for a medical checkup, and most of their medical appointments that they go through will be for either vaccination or if they are not feeling well. So these two aspects, vaccination part, or if they are not feeling well for, if they are visiting a medical doctor, what happens repeatedly? There will be injections or something that the child doesn't like, medications part. So they will associate that medical setting with some sort of discomfort or pain. This is nothing but associating two stimulus. So here what they are associating, most of the medical things, they are associated with pain, and they have formed a pair and they are trying to associate the dental setting with the same medical setting. So the common things that they come across are the white coat, the injection part, the smell of a hospital, These things are common for medical and dental setups, and the child will start to generalize the things. So the process you have already learned. So the child has already acquired something and they will generalize it to dentistry. And what is your part is you need to show the child the discrimination part. That is, you need to differentiate the medical setup with the dental setup, and you have to extend the bad pair that has already formed. So the process can also be understood in the same way, that is acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extinction part. Okay. So the treatment techniques that are based on in the future classes, you will be coming across the behavioral guidance techniques, but I can't go through. I mean, in detail I can't explain you. But the treatment techniques that are based on this, this is a important Viva question. So you have to remember that the treatment techniques based on this classical conditioning theory or the counter conditioning and the systematic desensitization. These two techniques here, counter conditioning means counter. You are giving a counter for something. Counter conditioning is nothing but the child has already acquired a bad pair and you are countering that bad pair. So you are behaving in such a way to extinct that formed pair. Then systemic desensitization is forming a good pair. So there is a difference between counter conditioning and systemic desensitization. In systemic desensitization, if the child is having some phobic thing, you will be systemically, in a systematic way, you will form an association, good association between dentistry and so the counter conditioning and systematic desensitization, if you come across and if you learn these things in next chapters, you will understand it in better way. But for this class or at this time point, you need to remember that counter conditioning and systemic desensitization are the two treatment techniques that are based on classical conditioning theory. And then the most important or the interesting part, actually I can say, is the Watson's little Albert experiment. That was a human experimentation based on this theory. So now I want to revise whatever has happened till now. We are dealing with classical conditioning theory. Classical conditioning theory, other names for classical conditioning theory or the Pavlovian conditioning, respondent conditioning, or learning by association. So these are the synonyms for this theory, and it has been proposed by Ivan Pavlov in 1903. He was a Russian physiologist and he was dealing with digestion aspect and he was experimenting on dogs. Accidentally, he came across this theory because he saw that whenever they used to feed the dog after a bell sound, and he observed that whenever the dog hears the bell sound, it is salivating. So accidentally he came to the theory. Here what happens, you have to understand four terms, that is unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response, which is actually an innate thing, which is a reflex thing or an emotional thing, which is already inbuilt in our body. And conditioned stimulus is something which we pair it with the unconditioned stimulus so that we get the same response. So conditioned stimulus and conditioned response are a formed ones, whereas unconditioned stimulus and response are the innate ones. Then the process of classical conditioning theory. The process of classical conditioning theory can be divided or can be explained in a systematic way, which includes acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. This process, you need to understand them, because acquiring something and generalizing the things for everything, then starting differentiating, then extinction, that is the pair which has formed will extinct, will the person or loses the pair, that is extinction, and spontaneously they might acquire this pair, and that is spontaneous recovery. And the examples that you can quote for the classical conditioning theory or best examples are pain associated with injections, then white coat fear, then the hospital atmosphere, the hospital smell, the reception aspect, similarities that there will be between a medical setup and a dental setup, they all can lead to either distress, anxiety, or pain in a child. So they are the examples that you can quote, and then the treatment the techniques that are based on classical conditioning or the counter conditioning, where you will be going in a reverse manner to break the pair, and systemic desensitization, where you will be forming a nice pair. So either constructing a pair or breaking the already formed pair. They are the two techniques that are based on classical conditioning theory. You can understand it in better way after you go after you will be learning the behavioral management techniques in the future classes. So, but at this point, you need to remember that they are the two techniques that are based on classical conditioning. They are the counter conditioning and systemic desensitization. Then is the interesting Watson Little Albert experiment that I will be dealing in the next part, because so this Watson experiment I will be explaining in the next part. So the So there is a third part of classical conditioning theory, which is Watson's Little Albert experiment. Till now, we have seen only dog experimentation. This is the first and last human experimentation. Actually, it was very unethical experiment, but interesting facts they have observed. That's why we are discussing the Watson Little Albert experiment. And nowadays, it's highly impossible to do such unethical experiments. You need ethical clearance before you are doing some experimentation on humans. So, American psychologist named Watson, John B. Watson, and his graduate student Rainer first used this classical conditioning to elicit an emotional response in a child. The aim of their test was to know that fears can be acquired through classical conditioning. So they want to know whether fears can be acquired through classical conditioning theory or not. And the participant that they have selected for this research was a small 11 months old infant, actually Albert B. So the little Albert the experiment in that Albert B was the name of the participant. He was 11 months old when he was being experimented, and he was son of a woman who worked in the same clinic as Watson. So how was little Albert conditioned to hate the rat means? Actually, they placed him on a mattress in a room where lab rat was within his reaching distance. But initially, Albert had no fear towards it, and he started playing with the white lab rat. Then, in the series of experimentation, what they did, they then struck a hammer on a steel bar behind Albert, and Albert began to cry. So this is actually unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. Whenever a small 11 months old child hears a loud noise, he starts crying. So this was the unconditioned stimulus and response pair. And what these scientists did was they started pairing this loud sound with a rat. So what happened for the next 17 days, Watson and Rainer began a series of fear conditioning experiments. And they also conducted tests to find out if Albert's fear response could be generalized. So what they found was there was generalization. So the child started fearing not only that white furry rat, but anything which was furry. He started getting afraid of, and he started crying whenever he saw anything which was furry. Even a furried toy, he started crying. So he started generalizing the things because of that fear induced in him. Albert also seemed to fear a white rabbit, a dog, or a sealskin coat. So the experiment was the loud sound, actually unconditioned stimulus, is associated with unconditioned response of crying, and the scientists they have fed the rat, sorry, with this unconditioned stimulus, that is loud sound, and automatically they start The fear was induced in the child and he started crying whenever he saw any furry object because that was generalized. And in day-to-day life also, if a mother starts screaming after seeing a lizard, automatically the child actually child doesn't have any feelings towards a lizard. But whenever the mother feels afraid of that lizard, the child also starts feeling the same thing because he learns the thing from because the mother is screaming. The loud sound is associated with the natural response of crying, and the child starts fearing whenever he sees a lizard. So after conditioning, the Albert started crying on seeing any furry white coated thing. So the ethical consideration in this experiment are that Albert's mother left her job and Watson and Ryder reported that they were denied the opportunity to remove the conditioned emotional response. So here the experiment was stopped in the middle actually after the child has acquired thing and he started generalizing the thing. The experiment stopped there. Actually, these scientists they want to know further process also, that is discriminating the things and extinction part also they wanted to do, but Albert's mother, she came, she actually initially she doesn't know that her child was being experimented. And when she became aware of it, she left the job and she took away Albert. This has been disputed as it is believed that they were aware of Albert's departure a month in advance, but they did not revert or reverse back the experiment. Some believe Albert's mother may not have been fully aware of the experimental condition and effect on her son. So nowadays, what is important is the informed consent, which is not mentioned in the Watson original article. So a judgment cannot be made about this ethical issue. Also possible that Albert was vulnerable to psychological harm as a result of these experimentation. How his psychology was in his future, nobody knows. And Albert was subjected to severe anxiety and distress, and the experimenters made not attempt to end the experiment and attend to his distress in an appropriate way. So these are all unethical things. Some psychologists have suggested that Albert's conditioned fears might have disappeared over time. However, it is reasonable to assume that Albert was not only emotionally traumatized by the experimental procedures to which he was subjected, but was also likely to have suffered some kind of lasting psychological harm. So the thing that you need to remember is that experiments using any human participant in this way should be considered unethical today and would not be permitted. But whatever it might be, the things that you need to learn from the little Albert's experiment are that not only dogs but humans learn through this classical conditioning theory, and they acquire few pairs and they generalize few things, and in the process of constructivism they start discriminating the things, and sometimes there can be extinction and spontaneous recovery is also possible sometimes. So the revision part of this theory is that classical conditioning theory. It is one of the important learning theories, and the synonyms for this theory are learning by association, Pavlovian conditioning, respondent conditioning. Here the terms that you need to remember are the unconditioned stimulus response pair and conditioned stimulus response pair. Unconditioned stimulus response pair is a reflex thing or innate to our body, that is it can be either a reflex or an emotional response, and conditioned thing is a learned thing where the unconditioned stimulus will be repeatedly paired with unconditioned stimulus leading to the same response. Okay, these are the terms that are very important in this, and the experiment that was done by Ivan Pavlov was the dog experiment. Actually he was studying digestion, but there was a repeated association of a sound of a bell with the food, and the dog started salivating. Even on hearing some bell sound, it started salivating, which led to the proposal of this classical conditioning theory. The process of classical conditioning theory can be understood. The process itself is in a few steps, that is acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extinction, and spontaneous recovery. Anything passes through these steps only. And the The examples, clinical examples that you can quote are the acquisition of pain that is associated with this injection pain, or anxiety associated with white coat or hospital atmosphere, smells associated with the hospital. They all form some pair, and child starts generalizing the things, the what he has experienced in the medical visits. He will generalize the things for a dental setup also. And the as a pediatric dentist, you have to show the difference between a medical setup and a dental setup. That's very important. And the behavioral guidance techniques that are based on this classical conditioning theory, or the counter conditioning, where you will be countering something, you will be breaking the pair, and systemic desensitization, where you will be forming a good pair. So these are the two things that you need to remember. Then comes the little Albert experiment, which was an unethical human experimentation on a small 11 months old child by Watson. And he started giving, for initially the rat or a mice was a neutral stimulus for the child, but whenever it was paired with a loud sound, which was an unconditioned stimulus, giving a cry as an unconditioned response, this pair has formed. And he started generalizing the things. Any furry thing, he started crying on seeing that furry thing. So this was an unethical experiment that was done on a small child. Even her mother has no idea what her son was going through. Nowadays, informed consent is very important, and you should not experiment like this. This completes classical conditioning theory. I hope we had nice revision of this theory. And whenever you get it as a 4 marks question, either in the classical conditioning term, or respondent conditioning, or learning by association, or Pavlovian conditioning, you have to mention all these things to get your 4 marks. And Viva, whenever they ask, definitely the important Viva questions will be: what are the clinical examples that you can quote for classical conditioning, and what are the treatment techniques that are based on classical conditioning theory. And the most important, another Viva question can be the process of classical conditioning, that is acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extension, and spontaneous recovery. So these completes classical conditioning theory. Hope you had a nice time. Bye. Hi students. This is again Rekha Lakshmi Kamatam. I am continuing the previous week's class, that is learning theories. So learning theories, previous week I have covered classical conditioning theory. Now it's time to learn another theory, that is operant conditioning. So operant conditioning, this is also known as, or synonymous term for this is the instrumental conditioning, and it has been put forward by B.F. Skinner in 1938. So if you see the terms either operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning, so let's now know what is the exact meaning of instrumental and what is the meaning of operant. So instrumental, the English meaning for instrumental word instrumental is serving as a means of pursuing an aim, involved, influential, contributory. So whatever it might be, influential. So influencing, something is influencing the way we are behaving. So it is called instrumental conditioning, because something is influencing our behavior, something is conditioning our behavior. And even the word operant means behavior which is initially spontaneous and which may reinforce or inhibit the recurrence of that behavior. So for this, to understand this, the best example that I can quote is initially spontaneous. Initially spontaneous means the behavior, innate behavior of us. Say for example, we had some exam and you wrote the exam without copy. So initially spontaneous behavior of your nature is writing an exam without copying. So this initial spontaneous behavior if it is reinforced, reinforced means if it is, if the teacher recognizes your behavior and if she or he appreciates your behavior, automatically what happens? You will increase the same behavior. You will try to write other exams without even copying. Or say for example, another girl is there or boy is there and initial spontaneous behavior of that person is trying to copy something. And if the teacher catches you and punishes you, you will try to inhibit your habit of trying to copy in an exam. So our behavior, which is initially spontaneous, it is being either reinforced or it is being inhibited. So the surrounding factors are judging, or the surrounding factors are helping you in shaping your behavior. Thus, this society is definitely responsible for the social behavior of each and every person. So, operant, the word operant, if you understand the meaning of these words, that is instrumental and operant, this theory becomes very easy. Otherwise, it is not like classical conditioning theory. It is somewhat confusing and you might not remember. You might feel as if you have understood everything, but after 5 to 10 minutes, everything will get erased out. So it's very difficult. But if you try to understand it and try to think about the theory, definitely it makes you easy. So learning where frequency of your behavior depends on the consequence that follows that behavior. Another simple example is an adolescent, say for example 13 or 14 years boy, he is trying to smoke. And if his father catches him and scolds him, what happens? The frequency of behavior will decrease. Or otherwise, if the parent doesn't punish him, but if they try to make him understand the consequences of smoking, and whenever he is not smoking, if they try to praise him that he is trying to understand the scenario, definitely the behavior of that person will change. I mean, he will try to, in the initial stages of that habit formation, definitely he can quit that habit easily. So learning where frequency of a behavior depends on the consequence that follows that behavior. The consequence that is following the behavior is judging him whether to continue the same behavior, do it frequently, or just stop that behavior. So whenever the frequency will increase if the consequence is reinforcing to the subject. So if the consequence of his behavior is reinforcing him, so he is getting back a positive response for what he is doing, definitely the frequency will increase. And if the consequence is not reinforcing or punishing to the subject, if he is getting back something he doesn't like, definitely the frequency of that behavior will decrease. So before going into the theory, I think it's, so let's revise the things. So now today's topic is actual operant conditioning, also called as instrumental conditioning. It has been put forward by B.F. Skinner in 1938. So the words instrumental and operant, the meaning of the words instrumental and operant are very important. Instrumental is serving as a means of pursuing an aim. The best thing you can remember easily is the influential thing. So something is influencing the way we are behaving. So instrumental conditioning. And operant conditioning means, operant means the behavior which is initially spontaneous. It may get reinforced or it may get inhibited. So that is the meaning of the words. Then learning with frequency of your behavior depends on consequence that follows that behavior. So the important words that are getting repeated is behavior, consequence, behavior, consequence, behavior, consequence. So you will be behaving in certain way. There will be certain consequence for that behavior that judges you what to decide, what to do, what not to do. then your behavior will be, we will be modifying our behavior, then there will be again consequences, then you again modify your behavior, then again the consequences. Like that, it is like a chain reaction where the behavior is being modified repeatedly by the consequences that we face after initially spontaneously behaving in certain manner. So before going into the exact theory of Skinner, another person we should definitely think about is Thorndike. Edward K. Thorndike. He was a person in between who survived in between 1874 to 1949, and this person is the author of Law of Effect. So law of effect is almost similar to Skinner's operant conditioning, but operant conditioning is a refined thing of Edward Thorndike's law of effect theory. This theory simply says that behavior with favorable consequences will occur more frequently, and behaviors with unfavorable consequences will occur less frequently. Okay, so a child who is getting a favorable thing due to his behavior, if he is getting a favorable thing, will definitely repeat the same thing. Even it is important while rearing a child, if your parenting style is not good or a parenting is not good, what happens for his wrong behaviors, if the consequence is favorable for him, even parent is not punishing, and at the same time if they are supporting the child, what happens, he becomes a spoiled child, and he doesn't know, unknowingly he will be learning the bad behavior. So this plays a lot of role in child rearing. So behaviors with favorable consequences will occur more frequently. If say for example a child is repeatedly playing a game in a mobile, and the parents are just ignoring him because they are busy with their works and they don't want to tell the child that there will be certain consequences if you play on in mobile for hours together. So what happens? The child thinks that it's fine if you even play the whole day. If you start playing with a mobile, nothing happens. So the child, what he does, he will be repeating his behavior more. He will be doing it more frequently, because he is not getting any unfavorable consequence. He is getting a favorable consequence from the parents that he can do the same thing. Thus, his behavior will occur more frequently, and behaviors with unfavorable consequences will occur less frequently. So, behavior with unfavorable consequences means if the child tries to steal something. Say, for example, a child came from school and he has shown the mother a new eraser or a new pencil, and if he says that he got it from his friend, and if the parent scolds him for doing the same, but it scolds him that he should not take other things. Definitely, the child in their early stages of growing, they will know that getting, even if he likes something, he should not steal other things and he should not bring them home. Thus, he stops even if he likes that pencil or eraser or pen, whatever it might be, even if he likes, he might ask the parent, but he never steals a thing from others. So behavior with, and because it is getting an unfavorable consequence of scolding from his or mother not speaking to him, so he is losing the love of the mother. So these are all the unfavorable consequences that he is facing because of his behavior. So his behavior, he tries to modify it accordingly. So this theory is very simple. Law of effect. So something, law of effect, the consequence is the effect here, so that is influencing our behavior. It is almost same as Skinner's theory, but it is a simplified version, and he created puzzle boxes for research on cats. So let's see the picture of the puzzle box of Thorndike. This is Thorndike's puzzle box, wherein the box will have a lever, and if the cat touches that lever, then only the box will open. So the cat will be placed inside the box and the food reward will be placed outside the box. Okay. Initially the cat cannot come out of the box, but once it learns that behavior of that pressing on the lever will result in getting out of the box and it can reach the food, definitely the cat, it tries to repeat the same behavior. The consequence of it opening the door is it is getting its food. So in order to get that food, so there is a positive thing waiting for it. So it tries to learn or modify its behavior quickly. So law of effect as proposed by Edward Thorndike is nothing but a response. There will be a natural spontaneous response for every person, and if that spontaneous response is giving satisfaction for that person or even an animal, so if it is giving satisfaction, what happens? The response will be repeated. So repeated response will be there. So there in Skinner's theory we will be learning behavior consequence, behavior consequence. It is almost one and the same. So the response here, response is nothing but our behavior, and here only the author is speaking about the positive things, only satisfaction. So if it is getting satisfied, or so there will be a repetition of the same behavior. So coming back to the Skinner's theory, I have already told you that these two terms are very important in Skinner's theory, that is behavior and consequence. So what is the behavior and what is the consequence of that behavior? So this is Skinner's box. So Skinner's box is almost similar to that the puzzle box of Thorndike. So it is also a box wherein he experimented it with rat actually, and there will be positive things and both positive and negative things. There Thorndike he placed only positive food reward, that too outside the box, but here Skinner's box is special because it will have positive things and negative things. The rat will be facing electric shocks if it presses some lever, and if it gets food pellets if it presses one lever. So whenever it does something, sometimes it is getting positive things and sometimes it is getting negative things, and on repeated exposure the rat learns what to do and what not to do. So the thing that is giving it satisfaction, it is trying to repeat that behavior. So if the rat learns to do or to press something to get the food, it wants food, it doesn't want electric shock. So then it learns to press something to get the pleasant thing, that is food, and it learns not to press the thing which will give electric shock, which is unpleasant for the rat. So it has modified its behavior such that it gets only the favorable things, and the behavior which is important here, the behavior which gives favorable things it tries to repeat, and the behavior which is giving negative things it stops doing. So thus Skinner or proposed the theory based on this. So again another Skinner's air crib is there for human experimentation. Whatever it might be, the basic essence of the theory is same, whether it is a rat, whether it is a pigeon, whether it is a human baby, everything is one and the same. So next part I will be telling the essence, exact thing of operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning theory, or even Skinner's theory. So welcome back children. So till now in the first part I told you, so let's have a fast revision. So I am telling about operant conditioning or instrumental conditioning by B.F. Skinner. And instrumental, the word instrumental means influencing, the word operant means the behavior which is initially spontaneous is either being reinforced or inhibited. So learning where frequency of a behavior depends on the consequence that follows the behavior. So here the important words you should remember are behavior and consequence. Behavior leads to certain consequences. The initial spontaneous behavior of a person leads to certain consequences, and that consequences will mold your behavior. This is the main thing. And before going to the exact theory, I told you about the Thorndike's law of effect. He is the author of the law of effect. It is almost similar to Skinner's thing. Here the behavior with favorable consequences will occur more frequently, and behavior with unfavorable consequences will occur less frequently, and he created certain puzzle boxes for research on cats. This is one of the puzzle box that has been created by Thorndike to do research on cats. So law of effect in a simpler way, response of a person and that leading to a satisfaction and that satisfaction causing a repeated response. Coming back to the Skinner's theory, I told you the two important words that definitely have that words that you should get into your brain are the behavior and consequences. The behavior leading to consequences, which in turn mold or shape your behavior. Then there will be certain consequences that again mold your behavior. Thus, in our lifetime, our behavior, we will be learning so many things, incorporating so many things, and in our day-to-day life, we will face certain consequences due to our behavior, which lead to modification of our behavior. So this is a Skinner box wherein the rat will get negative and positive things, and the rat finally learns what to do to get the favorable things and what not to do not to get the unfavorable things. And another one is a Skinner's egg crib. So let's see certain general day-to-day examples. The first picture depicts that a child is showing his A grade, and in return he is getting certain consequences and money from the parent. So the parent is giving money and telling him to buy something that he likes for getting A grade in the exam. So whether the child will like it or not, definitely the child will like it. So it is a pleasant thing for a child. Next picture is not about the child, it is about an adult. Say for example, wife and husband, and if a husband gets a scolding from the wife and repeated shoutings from a wife, definitely is it pleasant for a husband? Definitely it will not be pleasant for a husband. So and again this thing is the first picture is depicting the same parent scolding a child for his behavior. Then the picture is showing that the child is left alone in a room. So you are not showing any love and affection for the child, and it is left like that. Is it pleasant for a child? No, it is not pleasant for a child. Even shouting from a father is not pleasant for a child. Next picture is depicting something, a girl is trying to touch the stove which is very hot, and what will be the consequence of that? Definitely the child will have a burnt, and which is not pleasant for the girl. And another picture is depicting that child, though it is not exactly depicting, the child here is deprived or taken away the TV, the privilege of watching a TV is taken away from a child, and because of which he is sitting lonely without any entertainment. So this is also not pleasant for a child. So if you look at all these examples, just keep them in your brain. Let's see the essence of Skinner's theory. Though it seems very confusing, if you try to understand them, it will be really very easy. And if you try to by heart them, it will be very difficult. Okay. So here the things that are in bold are exactly positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So four terms you will be getting in this theory. Though they seem something similar, and you might get confused, but actually there is a difference between each and every term. So first and foremost that you are visualizing is the positive reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is something, whenever the word reinforcement comes, reinforcing a behavior means you are trying to increase the behavior. Whenever the word reinforcement comes, if you observe below that, actually there is something behavior, but behavior in reinforcements, if you observe, there will be increase in the behavior. You tell it as a reinforcement whenever the behavior of a child increases, that is, he will try to repeat the same spontaneous behavior. So then what is the difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement? So both are reinforcing the behavior of a child. So both things are trying to increase the behavior of a child. Then what is the exact difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement? There is a difference. So in positive reinforcement, I am repeatedly telling the same thing. In positive reinforcement, the child will be getting something they like. So the child is getting something he or she likes. That is, you are adding something for a child which he likes in order to increase the behavior of a child. Then what is negative reinforcement? Negative reinforcement also, you are trying to increase the behavior of a child. But here you are taking away something he doesn't like. So I can say something. Okay, if the child has behaved very nicely at home, he did all his works, he helped you in the same. I'm telling my example actually. If the child is helping the mother in the day-to-day works and he is completing his homework without creating any mess or problem, then his behavior is good. So you want to increase the behavior of a child. What you can do? So first thing, I can cook something which is which he or she likes. So I'm giving something for a child which he or she likes in order to increase the same behavior. So you want the same behavior the next day, the subsequent day. So repeatedly you want the same behavior. For that, you are trying to add something which the child likes. So I will cook something that my child likes in order to increase the same behavior. Then what is negative reinforcement? Today, I think all of you know bitter gourd. So bitter gourd, most of the children they don't like. But actually, I have cooked the bitter gourd for lunch. So what I can do, but from morning to afternoon, the child has behaved very nicely. So at about 1 o'clock, I will tell my child, your behavior is awesome today. You did your homeworks, and not only your homeworks, you have helped me in my work. But unfortunately, I have cooked bitter gourd for you, which you don't like. So, so as you behaved very nicely today, I am removing this bitter gourd from your lunch. So I don't want to serve you bitter gourd, and instead of bitter gourd, I will give some omelette for you. Okay. So dal and omelette makes a nice combination, and the child is very happy. Here I did two things. First thing is I have removed something that the child doesn't like, and I have added something that he likes. So here both positive reinforcement is there and even negative reinforcement is there. So I think you got the difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Next part I will be continuing the main essence of Skinner's theory. Hi students, I am continuing the Skinner's theory. Till now, I think in the previous two parts, I told you that the names for this theory are instrumental conditioning or operant conditioning, the word meaning of the words. Then I have told about Edward Thorndike law of effect, which means actually their behavior increases whenever he gets a favorable consequences and the behavior decreases when a person gets unfavorable consequences. So actually the words response and satisfaction have been mentioned in Thorndike's theory, and response of a person leading to getting satisfaction as a consequence, then definitely there will be increase in the same response. He experimented on cats actually, and Skinner's many things are there actually. Main thing is experimentation on rats. Skinner's box it's called, and then even for human experimentation, pigeon experimentations. But whatever it might be, the main things that you need to remember whenever you get this question or these things, that is positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment and negative punishment. So I told you that whenever the word reinforcement comes, then you have to make a note that the behavior of a child increases whenever you are reinforcing a child. Reinforcement itself means you are trying to increase the behavior. So whether it is positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, you are trying to increase the behavior of a child. So in positive reinforcement, I told you the difference between positive and negative reinforcement is, in positive reinforcement, you are adding something that a child likes in order to increase the behavior, whereas in negative reinforcement, you are taking away something the child doesn't like in order to increase the behavior of a child. For this, I have best example that I have quoted is my day-to-day example. If my son or my daughter, if he or she behaves nicely that day, I'm removing bitter gourd from the lunch and I'm adding egg as a reinforcement for their good behavior. It is both an example for negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Here, removing the bitter gourd comes under negative reinforcement and adding omelette comes under positive reinforcement. And then comes punishment. Punishment, whenever the word punishment comes, you are trying to decrease the behavior of a child. So you are trying to decrease the behavior of a child. So punishment, punishment, punishment itself, you have to remember that you are trying to decrease the behavior of a child. But what is the difference between positive punishment and negative punishment? Means same thing. Positive punishment, you are adding something that the child doesn't like in order to decrease the behavior of a child. Whereas negative punishment, you are taking away something he likes. Okay. So this might confuse you, but simple thing, very simple thing. So if, say for example, a child is doing something naughty, naughty means, okay, here he's tearing the papers from his notebook. So the child is tearing the papers from his notebook. So what the parent can do on seeing that, the parent can react in two ways. First way, the child has behaved in a very bad way. So the parent is very angry. He's having so many frustrations in office or outside frustrations, because of which the parent scolded him, beating, scolding. These things come under positive punishment. So the parent is behaving in such a way, he wants to decrease the behavior of a child, and for that he is adding something. Any child, they don't like scoldings and they don't like getting beaten up. So these things they don't like, but you are adding it to the child in order to decrease the behavior of a child. And another example or another scenario can be the same thing. The child is tearing papers. But what can a parent do? You did a very bad thing for which I want to punish you, and today's half an hour of watching TV is banned. So you are taking away a privilege for a child. Or the parent can tell, you should not talk with me for another 1 hour. I am not going to love you for 1 hour as a punishment for your bad thing. So this is something. So in these both the examples, what is the difference? Either the parent is scolding the child. So scolding the child means positive punishment. Okay. Negative punishment is taking away something they like. So love they like, but you are taking away. TV they like, but you are taking away. So something they like, you are taking away in order to decrease the behavior comes under negative punishment. Whereas adding something they don't like in order to decrease the behavior comes under positive punishment. So I think you are clear about reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement word means increasing the behavior, whether it is positive or negative. Punishment word, punishment, if it comes, it is decreasing the behavior. If we are adding something which the child likes in order to increase the behavior, it comes under positive reinforcement, and taking away something he doesn't like in order to increase the behavior comes under negative reinforcement. Whereas adding something that the child do not like in order to decrease the behavior comes under positive punishment, and taking away something that they like in order to decrease the behavior comes under negative punishment. So with this background, I want to proceed to the next slide. Next are the reinforcers. Reinforcers are nothing but whatever you use to increase the behavior, they are reinforcers. They can be materialistic things or just a pat on the shoulder or a prize or giving something there as a reward. If you are giving a child either in a material aspect or something they like, something they feel as a respect, if they give something, then they all come under reinforcers. And you might not get the same terms what I have told, that is positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. You might get generally like this: reinforcement, omission, punishment. So reinforcement is a broad term for both positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Whereas what is omission? Omission is nothing but negative punishment, and punishment is positive punishment. So here omission is nothing but omission. Here it is omission is nothing but negative punishment. That is, your negative punishment means you are trying to decrease the behavior of a child by taking away something that he likes. So the best example for omission in our clinical scenario is during operating. If the child is not cooperating, we will tell the child that we will be sending out his or her mother from the operatory. So you are telling the child that you will be omission. Here it is the best example for omission because you are trying to remove something that the child likes. Mother is a pleasant thing for a child. If you are taking away mother from his or her presence, definitely the child feels it as a punishment. But here you are not directly punishing the child, but you are punishing him in an indirect way in order to decrease the behavior of the child. And punishment is nothing but same positive punishment. So here we came across presentation of a pleasant stimulus, withdrawal of an unpleasant stimulus, withdrawal of a pleasant stimulus, presentation of an unpleasant stimulus. It is so simple actually, but it seems very confusing. So presentation of a pleasant stimulus means you are giving something that the child likes. Withdrawal of an unpleasant stimulus means withdrawing something that the child doesn't like. Okay, so these two actually they will reinforce the behavior. Whereas withdrawal of a pleasant stimulus is omission, nothing but negative punishment. Presentation of an unpleasant stimulus is nothing but punishment, positive punishment. So first thing, presentation of a pleasant stimulus is nothing but positive reinforcement. Here you are presenting something that the child likes in order to increase the behavior of a child. Second one is withdrawal of an unpleasant stimulus. Here you are trying to withdraw something that the child doesn't like in order to increase the behavior of a child. It is also reinforcement, but it is negative reinforcement. Then withdrawal of a pleasant stimulus is something you are taking away from the child that in order to decrease the behavior. So here it is example for negative punishment, and presentation of an unpleasant stimulus is direct punishment, that is positive punishment. So and primary versus secondary reinforcement. Primary reinforcers are the main things like food, water. The best thing we can quote for this is the dog. If the dog is given a biscuit for a good behavior, it acts as a primary reinforcer for a dog. Whereas if the owner calls it as a good girl or good boy for doing for their nice behavior, it comes under secondary reinforcement. And the process of operant conditioning, we have learned in classical conditioning theory that there will be a process of learning where we have discussed about, I think you remember, there will be acquisition, there will be generalization, there will be discrimination, there will be extension, there will be spontaneous recovery in classical conditioning theory. In the same way, here also the process of operant conditioning can be told in two steps, that is acquisition and shaping. Here the behavior is acquired and you are shaping your behavior. In this theory also the terms you can apply these terms, that is extension of that. If say for example a child is repeatedly getting a grade, first initially there were positive reinforcements for the child which increased the behavior of a child. That doesn't mean he will continue the same behavior. because after 2 years or 3 years, if he stops getting the same reinforcement, he feels bored. He feels no one is recognizing my work, no one is recognizing that I am doing good at studies. Why should I do this? So there will be extinction. Definitely extinction will also happen in this theory. So acquisition, shaping, extinction, generalization, discrimination. For this I can quote the example of my dog, because if I say, for example, you are reinforcing a dog by giving treats for its good behavior. For example, peeing outside the house, I am giving biscuits for it, and it is increasing the behavior, increasing the likelihood of peeing outside the house. But if I discriminate the things, if it goes in a particular place, even outside in particular place, if it's going, if I start giving biscuits, then it learns, it tries to discriminate that even outside few paces I can please the owner. So that's, it can discriminate the thing. So even discrimination, generalization can also be applied for this theory. And the main thing that is important is the contingency management. So this theory application part in pediatric dentistry or non-pharmacological behavioral guidance techniques. Among the techniques, one technique is contingency management, which depends whole and soul on operant conditioning theory. So contingency. Contingent means subject to change, dependent on. So here the behavior of a child is dependent on the consequences that he is getting in the clinic. And contingency is actually a future event or circumstance. You are managing the future events. So initially first day that you are wasting time, you are just say for example, you are just talking to your child and you're doing nothing. Sometimes the parent might feel that you are just wasting the time, but it's not wasting the time. It's you are planning the future event of a positive behavior from the child by increasing the rapport with the child. Thus, every step that you do in clean, knowingly or unknowingly, you will be applying operant conditioning theory in clinical practice. So all these things, say for example, giving a reward for a child for his good behavior, patting him, praising him, and then sending out the mother, or directly punishing the child, or removing some privilege from him. Everything you do in the clinic to either increase the behavior or decrease the unwanted behavior. So you will either try to increase the good behavior or you will try to decrease the unwanted behavior. Whatever you do for it, they all come under contingency management. So most of the times we don't know that this is the based on this theory, but we will be doing the same. So these are the important points in Skinner's operant conditioning theory. And finally, I would like to tell that reinforcement is always better than punishment for a child, because reinforcement will shape the behavior of a child in a nice way rather than punishing them. So punishment is a bad way actually. So reinforcement is always good, whether you are shaping a behavior of a dog or a child, whatever it might be, but always reinforcement is better compared to punishment. But sometimes you might need punishment also, but comparatively reinforcement is always better. Thank you. Hi students, let's continue the learning theories. In the previous classes, we have covered the classical conditioning theory and the operant conditioning theory. Now, the third learning theory, that is the observational learning theory. Observational learning theory is a very small theory, but you might get it as a 4 marks question, and even in Viva they will be asking you. So this observational learning theory has been put forward by Albert Bandura in 1961 to 63. So you have to remember that observational learning theory has been proposed by Albert Bandura. So before going into the theory, let's have a brief view on the two terms that we come across in this theory, that is imitation and vicarious reinforcement. So imitation. I think you will be knowing about imitation means you might have imitated your teachers, you might have imitated your parents. So imitation involves copying the behavior of others. So imitation involves copying the whole units of behavior, whereas vicarious reinforcement is something which involves seeing other person being reinforced. I think you know the meaning of the word reinforced, because in operant conditioning you might have come across this positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. Reinforcement is something trying to increase the behavior of a particular person. So if a person is getting reinforced for a particular behavior, that means if a girl has attended the college regularly, then she has been appreciated for it. That is, it acts as a positive reinforcement for continuing her good behavior. So if a person sees that, oh, attending college regularly, you will get some sort of appreciation, then they will try to imitate the same kind of behavior. So vicarious reinforcement is involving seeing another person being reinforced for a particular behavior and trying to reproduce or produce the same kind of behavior. So these pictures depict that a child is trying to imitate the adults, and a boy is trying to shave because he is trying to imitate what his father is doing. Then this is the most important thing, because aggressive things children will get attracted easily, and they try to imitate the same kind of behavior in their day-to-day life. So while parenting, it becomes a very important issue, because you should not allow the children to watch whatever they want to because the net is freely available for children these days, and it might get misused very easily. So these aggressive things, aggressive behaviors, they try to imitate or do the same kind of things in their day-to-day life. And daughters, if you see, they try to imitate or do the same as the mothers are doing. So if the mother is getting ready, or she's trying to invest her time on studies, the child or the daughter will try to open the books and do the same. And if the mother is trying to get ready or get makeup, then the child gets attracted towards the same thing, and she tries to imitate the same kind of behavior. So daughters try to replicate the same kind of behavior in their initial days. They try to do the same as what mother is doing. And not only human beings, even animals, they try to imitate their owners. So this is all about imitation and vicarious reinforcement, or the vicarious learning process. The experiment that is associated with this theory is the Bobo doll experiment. This Bobo doll, I think you might be knowing. I will show you the figure in the further slides. And Bobo doll experiment, this experiment has been conducted by Bandura, Ross and Ross, and they did this experiment on 72 children, including 36 boys and 36 girls from Stanford University School, and the children were aged between 3 to 6 years. So 3 to 6-year-old children, almost 72 children involving 36 boys and 36 girls were recruited into their study, and they used one male adult and one female adult as their role models. So they used both an adult male and an adult female as their role models. And these 72 children were again divided by Bandura into three groups, 24, 24, 24, that is 24 each. So 72 children involving 36 boys and 36 girls were further divided into three groups with 24 children in each group. And the first group, it was an aggressive modeling group, or that group received a model behaving aggressively towards a toy. And the second group, involving 24 children, again they were exposed to a non-aggressive model, and that model they did not behave, they did not do anything aggressively, they were just playing with the toys. And the final 24 children, they acted as control group, and they were not exposed to any model. So what this Bandura and other experimenters did is, they recruited 72 children including 36 boys and 36 girls, and there was one adult male model and adult female model, and they have divided these children into three groups, 24 each, First group was an aggressive model where they were allowed to see an adult behaving aggressively towards a toy, and the second group included 24 children again, and they were exposed to a model which did not behave aggressively. It was just playing with the remaining toys, and 24 children in the third group acted as control, and they were not exposed to any kind of model. So this picture shows the Bobo doll. I think you might have played with this Bobo doll in your childhood. This is a doll which bounces back even if you uh, even if you apply some pressure, it will bounce back to its original position. That is actually Bobo doll. This adult model will be behaving aggressively with this Bobo doll in one group. Whereas another non-aggressive model, they will be playing with the remaining toys and they will be ignoring this Bobo doll. So the children actually, all the children underwent to three stages. So stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So stage 1 included modeling. So and this modeling depended on the group to which they were recruited. So if the child is in aggressive model, they were exposed to the aggressive model, and if the child is in a non-aggressive model, they were exposed to or they were modeled with a non-aggressive model. And third, they did not receive any kind of modeling. So stage 1 included modeling, and stage 2 included aggressive arousal, and stage 3 included test for delayed imitation. So every child passed through these three stages. Let's see what exactly these stages are. Stage 1 is the modeling stage, wherein in the aggressive condition the model was aggressive towards the Bobo doll using distinctive, easy to imitate actions. The model put the doll on its side, struck it with the mallet, tossed it in the air, kicked around the room, and this sequence was repeated almost 3 times, and the model was also verbally aggressive. So in the modeling stage, in the aggressive group, the model was aggressive towards the doll using distinctive, easy to imitate actions. The model put the doll on its side, struck it with a mallet, tossed it in the air, kicked around the room, and this was repeated 3 times. And the model also used verbally also the model was aggressive. And in the non-aggressive condition, the model ignored the Bobo doll and played with the remaining toys. So the second stage was the aggressive arousal stage. What is this aggressive arousal? Means the child was the aggressive thing was aroused in the child. How the child was subjected to mild aggression as the child entered into the second room. And for the second stage, they have arranged 3 rooms actually. First will be the modeling room. Second will be the aggressive arousal stage for that one room, and then third stage will be another room. So the child was he was taken into the room. There were many attractive toys were there, but as soon as the child started to play with these toys, the experimental told the child that these were the experimental's favorite toys and had decided to reserve them for other children. So you should not play with these toys. You should not touch these toys. So the child was asked not to touch any toy. So automatically the child's aggression was aroused by stopping him playing with the toys. This was the second stage, and the third stage is the test for delayed imitation. How they imitated was tested in the third stage. So the children entered into the next room containing some aggressive toys and some non-aggressive toys. And the non-aggressive toys included tea set, crayons, plastic foam animal, something, something. And the aggressive toys included definitely the Bobo doll, mallet, pegboard, and guns, dart guns. So the child was in that room for 20 minutes and their behavior was observed and rated through one-way mirror. So why this one-way mirror means the child doesn't know that he is being observed, he or she is being observed, but the experimenter will be observing the behavior of the child in that room for almost 20 minutes, how they are behaving. Even other behaviors that did not imitate that of the model were also recorded, like punching the Bobo doll on the nose. So this was the exact study. So this observational learning theory, it has been put forward by Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura, he has proposed this theory based on an experiment which is called as Bobo doll experiment, wherein he has recruited 72 children including 36 boys and 36 girls and divided them into 3 groups, 24 each. And the first group was exposed to an aggressive model, second group was exposed to a non-aggressive model, and third group was not exposed to any model. And all the children, they underwent this test in 3 stages. First is the modeling phase. Modeling stage, they were either exposed to the non-aggressive model, aggressive model, or no model at all. And the second is the aggressive arousal stage, where the children were the children were asked to enter a room where many attractive toys were there, but they were not allowed to touch the toys. And then they entered into the next room, which was containing both aggressive toys and non-aggressive toys, and they were being observed for almost 20 minutes. The behavior was being observed for almost 20 minutes. So this is the picture showing the original Bobo doll experiment, wherein in the first row you can see adult model behaving aggressively with the Bobo doll, and in the subsequent rows you can see that a male child is behaving in the same way aggressively with the Bobo doll, and even the female child in the third row is also behaving aggressively, and new ways they are finding new ways to behave aggressively with the toy. So the results or the conclusions from the experiment, these Bandura et al., they uh, the results of the experiment were like this. The children who observed the aggressive models made far more imitative aggressive response than those who were in the non-aggressive or control models. This is actually expected, as expected. So the children who were exposed to the aggressive models imitated in a aggressive way rather than those in the non-aggressive and control models or the control groups. The further observations we will see in the second part. So I am continuing the observational learning theory. In the first part, we have come across that observational theory is another learning theory. We have already learned classical conditioning and operant conditioning theories, and this is another theory, and it has been proposed by Albert Bandura. And the basic experiment on which they have proposed this theory is the Bobo doll experiment, in which the experimenters have recruited 72 children and divided them into 3 groups. First group was exposed to the aggressive model, second group was exposed to a non-aggressive model, and third group was acted as a control with no model at all. And all children passed through 3 stages. First stage is the stage of modeling, wherein the child was exposed to whatever model to which group dependent on to which group the child was being assigned to. And the second stage is the aggressive arousal stage, wherein the child was the aggressive behavior in the child was aroused by stopping him touching the toys that were there surrounding him. The attractive toys were there in the room, but the child was restricted not to touch any toy because the experimenter had reserved those toys for other children. So next room, when the child entered into the third room and they were given both aggressive and non-aggressive toys, automatically the children were observed through one-way mirror. The behavior of the child was observed and the results were tabulated by the experimenters. And the results included, as expected, the children who observed the aggressive models made far more imitative aggressive response than those who were in the non-aggressive or control groups. And the girls in the aggressive model conditions also showed more physical aggressive responses if the model was male. So if the model was male, the girls acted more aggressively. Physically, they were more aggressive, whereas more verbal aggressive response was there if the model was female. So boys were more likely to imitate the same sex models than girls. So boys like to imitate the behavior of boy model rather than girl model. Evidence for girls imitating the same sex model was not so strong. And boys imitated more physical aggressiveness than the girls, and there was little difference in the verbal aggression between boys and girls. These were the conclusions that were drawn by Bandura et al. Based on the Bobo doll experiment. So the components involved in this learning process, we have come across the classical conditioning, we have come across operant conditioning. We have seen that in classical conditioning, the dog learns the process of this pairing by it, and it involves certain stages like acquisition, generalization, discrimination, and then extension and spontaneous recovery. And when it comes to the operant conditioning theory, we already learned that the child will be acquiring and shaping the behavior based on the reinforcement reinforcements that he or she gets. So like this observational learning theory also has two components, that is acquisition and performance. So classical conditioning, acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extension, and spontaneous recovery, whereas operant conditioning, it involves acquisition and shaping, whereas in observational learning theory, the two components are the acquisition and performance of the particular behavior. And the observational learning process, it goes through four things, that is attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. So attention, for a child to learn that, he needs some attention. So the child needs attention on the particular behavior in order to imitate the same kind of behavior, and he has to mentally retain the same thing. He has to get the mental image of whatever he has learned. He should be in a position to retain the same thing and reproduce by, he should have that motor skills to reproduce the same thing that he has paid attention to and he has retained. So attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation to do so is also very important in observational learning. All the advertisements that you see, they are basically, they use the same theory, because why they use film stars for projecting some new thing is that both the classical conditioning also plays a minor role, but actually it's like imitation. You want to imitate your film star. So if the heroine is using a particular soap, you try to use the same soap, and if hero is drinking thumbs up, you also try to drink the same thumbs up. So the same imitative behavior is being used in all these advertisements. So for motivation, you need something which you like, basically. So attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation are the four things are the in the learning process. So observational learning process involves attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. I think you need not by heart the things, because if you understand it, it's very easy. Their acquisition, generalization, discrimination, extension, and spontaneous recovery are the things in classical conditioning, whereas operant conditioning involves shaping the things. So acquisition and shaping, whereas here acquisition and performance. So I think there is no need to by heart the thing. If you understand the theory, automatically you can write it. And the process involves attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. You need attention of the child. He should be in a capacity to retain the thing. He should have the motor skills to reproduce the thing, and he should have enough motivation to have attention to pay attention to retain the thing and reproduce the thing. And our this can be applied to our daily brushing. So if we want a child to brush his teeth daily twice a day, actually you need some model for it. So if the parent starts brushing, automatically the child too starts brushing. So this is the classic example that I want to quote. And the factors that affect the observational learning process or the acquisition versus performance. So acquisition versus performance, it again if he gets enough reinforcement, automatically he will try to perform it. And characteristics of the role model. So if the character model is the one whom the child loves a lot or respects a lot, then automatically he tries to imitate the same kind of behavior. And expected consequences of the behavior, if they are positive, automatically the child tries to do the same thing. So if he is getting enough reinforcement, if he sees that a person is getting enough reinforcements for a particular behavior, the child automatically tries to imitate the same vicarious reinforcement is nothing but the same thing. So vicarious reinforcement is nothing but, if you see that someone is getting reinforced for a particular behavior, you try to imitate the same kind of behavior. And what is the behavioral guidance technique that is based on this theory is automatically modeling. So modeling is a behavioral guidance technique that is based on observational learning theory. Here what you do, you will show either a live model or a recorded model to a child who is, the model will be a child who is undergoing the treatment without any resistance. He is happily undergoing the treatment. You want to show the same thing to the child to make him understand that dental treatments, all the treatments will not be traumatic, and you will be undergoing the same kind of treatment. So he will try to behave in the same way on the dental chair. So you want the child to imitate the model. So you will be either showing a live model, either it can be other child or a sibling of a particular child. You can show them and make him understand that dental treatments, all the dental treatments will not be painful, all the dental treatments will not be traumatic, and you want the same cooperation from his side, his or her side. So modeling is a behavioral guidance technique that is based on observational learning theory. So vicarious reinforcement I have already told you. Seeing another person being reinforced for a particular behavior, you will try to produce the same kind of behavior. Then this is the last theory. This is not a learning theory, but I have added this because this is my favorite theory. So this is a small theory, very interesting theory. Sometimes you might get it as a 2 marks or a 4 marks question, which is the Abraham Maslow's self-actualization theory. This one is, it is a very simple one actually. Humanistic existential paradigm is another name for this theory. Here, what Maslow did was he developed a hierarchy of needs actually. So, the base of needs will be the physiological or the survival needs. So, these are the basic things any person need, and if you're not getting these basic needs, our energy will be diverted to fulfill these needs. So, physiological or survival needs like the food, water, shelter, clothing, these are the basic things that a person needs for his survival. And the next stage will be the safety needs. So once a person is satisfied with one level, he tries to go into the next stage. Okay. So for this, in this textbook, nice example will be quoted. If a newly married woman, if she gets the physiological needs and also if she feels safe in that new house, automatically she will enter into the next stage. Otherwise, she will stop there. So, physiological needs, safety needs, and next will be the love, affection, and belongingness. So, if a woman gets satisfied with the physiological needs and if she feels safe and secure in that place, automatically she will show her love and affection towards the new family. And then esteem needs. Esteem needs is trying to get an appreciation for your achievements. So these esteem needs are also important. If all the three below three things are satisfied, you tend to divert your energy towards the esteem needs. And my favorite last stage is the need for self actualization. Actually, the last stage will be the self actualization. Self actualization is something you will feel satisfied with, you will be happy, you will divert all your energy towards your passion in this stage. And after listening to this theory, you might be feeling that those who are famous, those who are wealthy will reach this stage, but actually none of the famous personalities can reach this stage. So most of the people who has reached this self actualization, that is who are happy with their happy doing the things that are they are passionate about, they are not famous people, they are known only around their family and friends. So those persons who are famous or those who are wealthy, they don't reach this stage, but it needs a satisfied mind with a diversion towards our passion that leads towards the self actualization. So self actualization is actualizing our potential. Becoming all in one is capable of becoming all, one is capable of becoming. So what we are passionate about, that we will become in this stage. So this is the actual hierarchy of needs, that is physiological needs, safety needs, love, affection and belongingness, then esteem needs and need for self-actualization. So this completes our theories.